Les started flying during World War II, completed his training in Australia and got to England. But the war ended before he got too far into his flying. So that's his background. He spent a fair bit of his later life in education, in visual education and teaching. So he's going to be talking about Gallipoli today. As he will tell you, he didn't learn much about it at school, so he's decided to do something about it in between time. I should just say that a couple of months ago I had a person teed up to talk and I got let down at the last moment. So I knew that Les had a talk prepared on Gallipoli, so I shanghaied him at short notice. He agreed to come and talk to us. And then he got crook, so he went to hospital. So he couldn't come on that occasion. But he's here today, second time round, and I'm sure you enjoy what he's got to say. Over to you, Les.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian. I'm just surprised to see so many people here today because of this particular topic. But my father-in-law, I discovered, was one of the first 11th Battalion from WA to land on Gallipoli. But in the whole of his life, he never spoke about it. So I never knew anything personally that happened. But now the rest is really a warning to all you younger men. Because when I went into a retirement village in City Beach last year, a very kindly man came up and talked me into would I give a talk on this particular topic. And I answered I'd have a go. Then I realised how little I knew about the real Gallipoli. And so I set about some research about Gallipoli. And this is the result. Now you might think that's a corny sort of a poster, but I think those sort of posters must have played a part during the First World War. But before we leave this title, I'd like to show you something. The might of the British Empire was going to go through that little place called the Dardanelles and go to Constantinople. It's a mighty long way from this country. You know, I had to wait 50 years till the end of the war before I found out how many young men were killed in Bomber Command. And for your knowledge, there were 55,573 young men who were aged perhaps 19, 20, 21, 22 or something like that were killed, and I didn't find out till 50 years after the war. I tell you what, I'm glad I didn't get into Bomber Command. Now, you can see this area down where the Dardanelles was. That was highly important for the British Navy to get through there, but they never managed to get through. The Turks were able to fire on them and sink some ships. Now, when you look at this group of men marching down Melbourne, that represents anything up to 700 to 1,000 men. Now that's terribly important to remember, that anything up to 1,000 men was a battalion. And if you remember some of the battalions that marched through the Perth during the war, the same battalions marched through the war, but they were called the 2nd 11th, the 2nd 28th, the 2nd 16th. It's terribly important to remember that number. Now, you've probably all heard about this place called Blackboy Hill, but the men had a motley of uniforms because it was early in the war. And every kid in WA knew about this man with a donkey because he was such an important man. Each man was issued with 200 rounds of ammunition, 2 days of food, and sent ashore. Not to have their rifles loaded, but only to use their bayonets. That's incredible. The Turks didn't believe in that, of course. This is the men standing on top of a battleship, because they used a whole variety of ships there. Just look at the number of men who have actually got flat hats, not slouch hats, but flat hats. So they didn't all wear slouch hats. And these men, those mopping big kit bags and knapsacks that they had to wear, everything they were going to wear for the whole period they were in Gallipoli, they had to carry it on their backs. And if any of you have ever been down a scrambling net, and I have been down a scrambling net, and I wasn't carrying all the gear these fellows had in a rifle, it was a terribly dangerous game as well. And undoubtedly some men got killed or damaged. Going ashore was all very well. They didn't have motorised boats, or if they did have motorised boats, they towed over boats. And as they were going ashore, they were being shot at by the Turks. The British didn't know anything about the Turks. And fancy sitting in one of those lifeboats, being towed ashore while the Turks were firing at them. Many, many got killed. There's always time for a cup of tea. If you were lucky to be wounded, you were taken on a hospital ship. But sometimes the hospital ships were so full they had to put them on the decks. Now everywhere that the men were in Gallipoli, they had to stand under these overhangs of rocks and shrubs and all sorts of things for protection. The Turks actually fired cannons or guns at them, but they used to explode 20 feet up in the air, which caused enormous amount of wounded or killing. Men were moving backwards and forwards to the lines closer to the remaining Turks that escaped from being bayoneted to death. Now this is a word we all learnt at school, the word ANZAC. What does it mean? Well, it means Australian New Zealand Army Corps. Every kid in the school knew that, and so it came about that legend. Everywhere on the land, they had to build places. Now remember, all the horses, because it was a horse-drawn period, they had taken their horses from Northern down to Fremantle, loaded them on the ship, and took them to here. But they only took them into the Middle East, into Egypt area. They didn't take them to Gallipoli. So the men had to be like animals. And here you can see this enormous crowd of men pulling a big water tank up that steep climb. Did you know that there are other people there at this particular invasion, like the British, the Canadians, the French? I only heard about the Canadians yesterday. Now how true it is or not, but I'll wait till I get to the very last slide to explain. This is the sort of terrain that these men had to cope with. These sorts of tunnels slightly into the wall. Then they used thousands and thousands of sandbags to give them some protection. That must have been murderous, because they were raining shells down on them as well as the ordinary bullets. If you put your nose around a corner, you might get it shot off. This is looking down where they actually landed in Gallipoli. When they got to the Middle East, the camp was already set up for them. Then they got orders to pack up everything and move to another site. So the horses were used to pull the wagons to those new sites, but they were left behind in Egypt. I don't know if you remember the time that the light horse, by the way, the light horse did go on this particular journey, but the light horse men, if you remember those famous charge where they defeated the Turks and those sort of things, unfortunately those young men had lived on a horse for days in the desert and gone without water and all those sorts of things. They had to shoot their horses because they weren't allowed to be taken back to Australia. I think some of the horses must have been going on to Egypt, because they certainly needed them there. Everywhere you look here, there's this sort of digging into the walls of the sand hills or the stone to get some shelter. Now, there were so many fleas and nits and all sorts of things there. The men who were around there thousands of men with hundreds dead lying about, caused all sorts of disease, and the hospital ships had to be there to take them away. Now, on the very first day, 2,000 men, you remember I mentioned about that 1,000 battalion coming down? The very first day they lost 2,000 men. But as in all wars, 124 reported back to Australia that were killed. So people must have accepted that. But when wars come along, the truth goes out the door. Now, you've all heard about snipers. Well, the Turks were certainly using a lot of snipers. Now, these two Australian snipers are not operating as they usually did. They're operating out of a trench. These guys usually got into the most hidden place you could find, behind a shrub or something. And that's where they use, by the way, I don't know if you know what a pull-through is, but it's a thing for pulling through the rifle to put oil on it or to clean it. But these men never used oil because it would give a trace of smoke every time they fired a bullet. And of course the opposite side sniper was looking for this little bit of smoke that might come about. This particular man, does he look a bit Chinese to you? Well, that's who he was. A very famous Chinese Australian sniper called Billy Singh. You might notice he's wearing a medal. When he got back to Australia, he was able to show his medal because the township where he came from treated him as a hero. But snipers played an enormous part in this war. He had a Chinese mother, an English mother and a Chinese father. This is where you ended up if you got wounded. Out on the side of a hill, in the blazing sun, and the flies. This particular person, I rather got an interest in him because he was a newspaper reporter who was selected from all the newspapers in New South Wales, in Sydney, to give the stories back to Australia. Having had a bomb go off outside my shed, my billet one day in England, I wouldn't like to be there when shells were dropping around. But now that litre of water doesn't sound a great deal, but they had to clean their teeth, shave themselves, and perhaps give some sort of a wash to your body. But it was mainly for your drinking. But that's what they lived on. At the moment, you don't know how long they were there, I don't think. But this man was a famous Australian commander. They were Turks, taken prisoners of war. And the two Aussies on the end here are looking after them. But they don't look like they're starved or anything like that. But men were on the move all the time. How would you like to climb up that cliff? This is just near the shore. To climb up there. They must have had tremendous trouble to get a foothold there. They were like burrowing rabbits. Every part of the hill they could tunnel into and form sandbag protection. I got a great surprise when I found the Australian nurses there. I'd never heard of them being there. They're Australian doctors in a tent hospital on Lemnos Island. It says, Brian accidentally changed it to enemy soldiers, but they were really Aussies. So this hospital was set up on this island. God knows how many men had to go through that place. These are these little nooks they carved out of the sand or the stone, and they often called it a funk hole. But it was where men could get some sort of rest and some protection from shells. Down on the beach, they had to build little jetties where they were bringing ships ashore with all sorts of supplies. Now, every child, they all knew about him. And there was the poster about him. But they never found out that he was shot shortly after this happened. This bunch of men were standing there getting their photograph taken when quite a number of them got killed. I can't mention this often enough, men were moving about. Now, if you can look here, can you see a man right in the centre? If I had the pointer, I could point it to. His head is up there. Only a few leaves and the man could be well hidden. So camouflage was terribly important. These are the sort of, I think you call them mountain guns, were fired back at the Turks. I'd never heard of tunnels being built before until I came here. A welcome thing. Remember I told you 2,000 men went. I met a man where I now live. His father was the adjutant in the 11th Battalion. His first day ashore, he got shot in the arm, got his arm taken off, amputated, and sent back to Australia on the same ship that he arrived on. Did you know the French soldiers were there, the British soldiers there, in much greater numbers? I never knew that before. And one photograph I had showed barrels and barrels of, must have been at least 100 barrels, huge barrels of wine that the French sailors, French men were being brought out from. Now, this is taken from 10,000 feet. I had a photograph in my computer showing two planes. The book I originally took it from, a man had flown over the lines to see what the Turks were doing. And high up in the sky, on another occasion, there was a Zeppelin. So the Germans had many, many German soldiers there as officers to prone up the backs of the Turks. Now, Lord Kitchener had to leave his premises in England to come out to this war to meet the Australians and New Zealanders and the British and the French and the Indians to talk about getting out of the place, because they can see no possibility of defeating the Turks to get up into above the cliffs. And here's his reception centre, or reception committee. If you notice this man with the peaked cap, he looks to me like a New Zealander. I presume the others are either New Zealanders or Australians. But they all came to the, or he came to the conclusion that they were going to lose. There's no flat country here. Turks who were wounded were looked after by Australian fellows. I never heard about snow falling there. An incredible number of men who were terribly excited about the first time they saw snow, but 1,300 of them ended up being taken away through snow. It was a terrible conditions there. And so that man agreed to them leaving. This is that journalist again I told you about. He had to make up his own uniform because he knew of the ruggedness and country like that. But he was never allowed to tell the truth. He wasn't allowed to tell the Australians that there were 2,000 men killed on the first day. This was all hell. But every war is built upon this sort of business. You remember when they landed? How many months ago since they left? How long were they there? Very few people can work it out or know about it. But they had to put up with all these terrible conditions. Typical Australians. That tin has got a tin of water, drips down the string into this basin. When it reaches a certain weight, the trigger is pulled. These guns were going off all night over those 2 nights. This is to confuse the Turks, because they had to leave in darkness. They had to bring the ships in darkness. And then they got onto the island of Lemnos, which is nearby. It might have been 20 miles, and I've no idea. How old do you think he is? You wouldn't believe he was 16, but he lived to over 100. How he got through the recruiting people, and God knows it. But he looks like a lad of 16 now. This man over here on the right, carrying his rifle in a case, I suspect he must be a sniper, because they looked after their rifles in particular care. Right up the top there, you can see the cliffs. Now how far away from the ocean to the top of those cliffs were? Just over a mile. And from north to south, just over a mile. So it wasn't a big area, but they were there for 10 months doing it. This is what Anzac Cove looks like today, and there's the road running along the top there. The word invader has never been used that I remember, but that's what we were. We were invaded. But this to me is highly important. How many men were wounded? Look, there were 8,700 Australians. There were 2,700 plus of New Zealanders. But have a look at the Great Britain. They lost 21,000 men, and they lost 52,000 who were wounded. India also lost them. The French lost them. Now, when I mentioned about Canada, I'd never seen it before. I'd never heard about Canada until yesterday. But maybe it was a contingent from Newfoundland. I don't know. The Turks lost 86,000 men killed, but they lost 164,000 men wounded. These are a colossal waste of men. But they all got off the area over 2 nights, and they escaped from there and went back to the First World War. What an end. Thank you.